All right, so let's finish up Act 1 with scenes 4 and 5, which is basically Hamlet talking to the ghost and learning what really went down in Denmark while he was in Germany. In scene 4, it's basically Hamlet and the guards waiting for the ghost. And it opens with what I would call word painting. You know, a lot of times students don't like Shakespeare because he talks too much, but Shakespeare didn't have scenery, and so he built the scenery with the words. We're going to meditate on the mystery of the ghost a little bit more. We'll hear a little bit of cliff trivia from Horatio, and then we'll run into the famous line, not said by Hamlet, that something is rotten, and that being one of the major images of the play, right? Rotten disease imagery, that something is rotten in the state of Denmark, which we kind of already knew, but now it's being confirmed. In scene 5, the ghost has asked Hamlet to, depart from the guards so that he can speak to them privately. And so scene 5 is the ghost speaking. We hear that the ghost is double doomed, and we'll talk about why the ghost is in such pain. We're going to look at how all the imagery starts flying together. We've talked about garden imagery a little bit, disease and rot imagery. We're going to talk about ear imagery along with flower imagery, all these images sort of being the major themes we'll trace throughout the play. We're going to kind of get into the ghost rules. The ghost tells Hamlet to avenge his death and then gives him 2 conditions for it, and what the ghost says when he departs. We'll see how Hamlet reacts to the ghost. We'll see how Hamlet and the guards have a swearing scene together, and then we'll sort of set up at the end of Act 1 for what is Hamlet's plan for revenge, which is, what this whole play is about. So, while they're waiting for the ghost at the beginning of scene 5, remember that Shakespeare's stage, the Globe, was outside, no curtain, no lights, and it was often this play was performed at, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So a lot of Shakespeare's plays open with characters walking on stage and saying stuff that's kind of obvious. Hamlet says, "What time is it?" And they say it's now drawn close to the moment when the spirit had its wont to walk, which is basically midnight. And Hamlet says, "Whoa, the air bites shrewdly. It is very cold." These are things that people would say normally, but they're also indication to the audience. The men would dress up warmly, they would carry torches, they would hold themselves, and they're setting up so that we all know, oh, it's night and they're outside. In one of my favorite plays, As You Like It, the characters walk on and they say, "So this is the Forest of Arden." And I just always like it when they just announce where they are in some ways. Hamlet, while they're waiting, he hears gunshots, and basically what it is he's hearing that, Claudius is having a big party celebrating his new reign, and every time he basically chugs a beer, they shoot the guns. And this is a tradition in Denmark. But Hamlet says it's a custom or tradition that's more honored in the breach than the observance, meaning it is low class and trashy of Claudius to be shooting guns and chugging beers. And this is why everybody says that Danish people are alcoholics. You kind of get the idea. It's a garbled speech, but Hamlet is basically like, I have many reasons that I dislike Claudius, and I'm just looking for anything about him that I don't like. It is true that in a lot of productions of Hamlet, Claudius drinks a whole lot, because Hamlet does make a lot of jokes about Claudius being a bit of a drunk and maybe being a little bit overweight. It's subtle, but it's there in the text. But while they're waiting, suddenly the ghost appears, and indeed, it looks like Hamlet's father. Now remember, this is the mystery of the ghost. It doesn't mean it's Hamlet's father. And Horatio tells them, don't think that's your father. This could be a devil that's going to deprive your sovereignty of reason and draw you into madness. It might lead you to a cliff. See, Horatio is protective of Hamlet and doesn't like the way the ghost is beckoning to him. He's like, what if the ghost splits in half and turns into some sort of horrible Lovecraftian Cthulhu nightmare and draws you crazy and makes you jump off? And so Horatio knows that ghosts can be deceiving. Satan is the father of lies and will appear to be a radiant angel, but actually be a devil. But Hamlet says, "Bring with you airs from heaven or blast from hell. Be thy intents wicked or charitable. I'll call thee Hamlet, father, king, O royal Dane. Oh, answer me." So Hamlet's like, I have chosen to see this as my father, and I will follow it. The men try to stop him, and Hamlet pulls out his sword and says, "I'm going to make a ghost of the one who tries to stop me from talking to this ghost. My fate cries out to me." But Horatio is very worried. He says that, if the ghost takes you to the edge of the castle, which is where it's taking him, It might make you want to jump. When you stand on a high place, it puts a toy of desperation in your mind. I don't know if you've ever stood on a high place and just looked down and like something in your head has said, why don't you jump? It happens to me, and I always like that Horatio says that it's a toy of desperation. But Hamlet goes, and the guards and Horatio panic because they're like, we had the prince with us. He has gone away with a ghost. If he dies, we're going to pay the price. And so they start panicking. And one of the guards, Marcellus, says something is rotten in the state of Denmark. All of this is bad foreboding, and he is right. And Hamlet just sort of disappears with the ghost, and they sort of wait at the same time that they're wandering around looking for him. So now we're in scene 5, sort of the private ghost scene. The ghost is suffering. The ghost suffers in 2 ways, what I call the double doom. During the night, he has no rest. He walks the castle of Elsinore. And during the day, he is confined to fast and fires till the foul crimes done in his days of youth are burnt and purged away. A sort of creepy purgatory that he's in. And so he suffers during the day and he suffers at night. And the ghost is miserable, right, is the point here. And nobody wants to see somebody that you love die, come back and tell you they're miserable. It'd be very different if King Hamlet descended like an angel and was like, Hamlet, I have returned from the blessed realm of heaven to tell you I was murdered. No, the ghost is suffering in the afterlife. And we get the idea that if Hamlet avenges his father's death, he'll be able to rest. He'll still burn in the prison house, as he says it. And he's not allowed to tell you the secrets of his prison house. There's very creepy things that the ghost says. That he'll finally be set free from at least walking during the night. But Hamlet is affected by it. He says, alas, poor ghost. And the ghost says, pity me not, but listen to the tale I've got to tell you, so that you can revenge. We see the introduction, one of the dominant images of the display is the ear. The ear is where people tell you lies. They pour poison into your ear, right? Metaphorically, when they tell you a lie, and then literally, that's what happens here in this particular play. Shakespeare's very good at this. He'll have an image that is literal, and he'll turn it metaphorical, and then he'll take a metaphorical image and make it literal. He's always moving on both levels so that the play has a lot of energy. But there was a false story told about Hamlet's father. He says, the ghost says bitterly, "'Tis given out that sleeping in my orchard, my custom always of the afternoon, that a serpent stung me." You know, that's the PR story. That's the press, the official story, is that Hamlet's father was bitten by a snake in his garden. Notice it's Garden of Eden imagery. And a snake, like Satan, bit me and I died. But that's not the truth. That's the appearance. But know, thou noble youth, the serpent that did steal thy father's life now wears his crown. I was killed by your uncle. And Hamlet says he knew it. He says, oh, my prophetic soul, I knew something was wrong with Claudius, and now I know the truth. And the ghost tells him that the whole ear of Denmark has been rankly abused by this false story. So notice that this is Garden of Eden imagery. Your uncle stole into the garden like Satan breaks into the garden, and he was a serpent. He was like Satan, and he stole my crown. And notice this is 2 brothers. So we have the Garden of Eden, and we have Cain and Abel as well, where the oldest murder, the first murder in the Christian story. So the garden that has been destroyed is in some ways is a metaphor for Hamlet's innocence. And this play is very much about young people growing up and realizing the world is not what it promises to be, and that it's corrupt, and there's a fall from innocence. So there's always sadness in any story about that. So the king's body, I mean, the murder was not very good, right? It's a strange murder, but he poured poison into his ear while he was asleep. Poison is a cowardly thing. It's a sneaky thing. If you're asleep and you kill somebody, that's particularly cowardly and disgusting. And of course to kill your brother. And the poison is horrible, right? Like it cracks open his body into Lazar-like sores. And it like hardens all his blood like possets of curd into milk or something like that. And the body itself is sort of leprosy-like. And sometimes the ghost looks like a zombie, with like decayed flesh and things like that. It's supposed to be a literalization of the body of Denmark, that the state is sick. Because Claudius, and this is a word students don't know very much, is a usurper. And there's nothing worse you could be in Shakespeare's day. It means you are not the rightful king. Going all the way back to the Hebrew scriptures, the king is anointed and chosen by God, and you're supposed to submit to it. And so an illegitimate king is not chosen by God, and you owe no obedience to it. So a usurper is something like Satan, who tried to usurp God's throne and was cast down into hell. So it's a satanic thing to do. The ghost tells Hamlet in very wordy lines about his death and about how horrible Claudius seduced his wife and how unhappy he is. He asks Hamlet to avenge his death. He doesn't say explicitly, kill Claudius. He just says, avenge me. And Hamlet says he's willing to do it. But the ghost gives him two conditions, and this kind of sets up the rest of the play. He says, but howsoever thou pursuest this act, taint not thy mind. Do not corrupt yourself. He wants Hamlet to somehow avoid becoming worse than the person he's revenging himself upon. And this is kind of philosophic, ethical, and not something people consider very much, but it is a classic problem in the revenge play, that the revenger cannot become worse than the person that he's revenging himself on. This is kind of where you get that idea from that Star Trek Klingon saying that revenge is a dish best served cold. You have to kind of focus yourself on just equating the scales and not becoming worse than the person you're avenging yourself on. It's very difficult to do because revenge corrupts yourself. And notice that revenge is not a Christian virtue. God says in the Hebrew scriptures, he says, vengeance is mine and it's not yours. Jesus says if somebody slaps you, you're supposed to turn the other cheek. So revenge is the opposite of Christian virtue. And so kind of the ghost is saying, be a Christian and do the non-Christian thing. It's kind of very, very difficult right from the start. So he says, taint not thy mind, and do not contrive against thy mother aught. Like, don't do anything to your mother. Leave her alone. Actually, what the ghost says is, leave her to heaven, and to those pricks that in her bosom lodge to prick and burn her. And you're like, oh, that sounds worse. So those are the two conditions the ghost gives him. Hamlet is, of course, usually an emotional puddle after the scene, sort of destroyed. But, he travels a lot of different emotions. Sometimes the character of Hamlet is called the dragon because he moves through, like, every possible emotion throughout the play. But he's super sad when the ghost leaves, and the ghost says, remember me, right? Those are his last lines. Do not forget me. Everybody else has, but not you. But then Hamlet, was depressed, and then he was sad about his father, but now he has a purpose. He's like, I have something to do. I was stagnant water, but now I've got something to do, and that makes him feel better. He says he believes the ghost 100%, and he actually gets a lot of energy. He gets wild, and maybe even close to happy. He's so manic when he runs into the guards, when they finally catch him again, after the ghost has disappeared. Horatio says, you were speaking wild and whirling words, my lord, and can scarcely calm him down. Hamlet tells them very little. He just says it's an honest ghost. That's all you need to know. And then he makes them swear that they won't reveal that he talked to the ghost or that they've seen the ghost. And the ghost voice says, swear, usually underneath the ground. And that scares the men, and they sort of run around. It's an oddly comic scene. And basically Hamlet gets them to swear on the cross of his sword two different things. That they will never reveal what they saw tonight, and that they will never reveal that they know that Hamlet's behavior, why it suddenly changed. Hamlet was super depressed and kind of just pouting in corners, and now he's going to act differently, and they can't say why they know that. And Hamlet's plan, and it's a weird plan, I will admit, he's going to revenge his father's death, and his first step is he's going to put an antic disposition on. That means I'm going to act crazy. I'm going to act like I lost my mind. You might be like, why is that step one in revenge? Step one, I will act crazy. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to Act 2. But that's his first plan, and he says, don't tell anybody that I am pretending to be mad. Act like I am really mad. Act like I've really gone insane. So the men agree. They agree to swear, and Hamlet feels good about things, right? He says, rest, perturbed spirit. He's like, I've got some energy. But it's also, he's not entirely happy because he ends the act with the rhyme couplet, right? He says, O cursed spite. The time is out of joint. O cursed spite. that ever I was born to set it right. He knows that he's been set up for a very difficult task. So Act 1 is ended. I title Act 1, The Ghost Walks, and now we're ready for Act 2. Act 2, I title Spies and Spying, because that's basically what it's about. But between Act 1 and Act 2, a good bit of time passes. Shakespeare's always mysterious about that. We don't know how much time passed, but enough passed that the whole castle is concerned that Hamlet has lost his mind. They're concerned on personal reasons. Nobody likes to see anybody lose their mind and go insane. But they're also concerned in political reasons. It is not healthy or good for a state for the heir to the throne to be mentally ill. So we're going to start to see from this point on Hamlet acting crazy, which is both funny and sharp and witty and insightful all at the same time, and very entertaining.